Welcome to my live stream Pursuance Project Q&A, which I haven't done in a few weeks, and which I'm doing now because I happen to have my lighting set up for a video I had to do on a related subject. Live stream Q&A. All right. If anybody has any questions, just let me know. Whew. In the meantime, I'll note a few things. The Pursuance Project, which we've, first of all, we have a new website at pursuanceproject.org that's much more understandable and wieldy than the last website text. We just changed that a few weeks ago, so haven't seen the new version. Take a look. It's something that you'll probably be more comfortable spreading around to people, knowing that they will be able to understand it. We still have all these videos up that we made. We're going to be launching some much better ones in the next few weeks as we prepare for our Kickstarter this summer. Some other materials will be around as well. Pursuance Project, as we've noted elsewhere, is good for a number of things. It's good for bringing together large numbers of people with no pre-existing relationships and allowing them to work together in ways that we've already seen successes from before in the past, particularly the last decade, with things like the campaign to oppose dangerous legislation like SOPA, the campaigns to assist the successful democratic revolution in North Africa. Everything Telecomics has done to provide internet access to those in insurrection against dictatorships who have had their internet access either cut off or vastly surveilled by dangerous police agencies. So there's a great deal that we have to model on, those of us who want to keep going forward with these kind of activities. We know a great deal about what techniques work. We have learned to do those things better now that we have some experience in doing them, obviously, and seeing what works and what problems come up. And so these are all things that can be done better. But more importantly than that, the Pursuance Project, by its very nature, takes advantage of that phenomenon whereby people coming together online very quickly are more able to get good ideas a fair hearing. That's something that's very hard to do in a traditional organization or nonprofit. It's also hard to do sometimes when you have an amorphous movement and there's a lot of noise by necessity. This is something that cuts down on the noise, cuts down on the friction that arises inevitably to some degree or another when you have people coming together without a framework or a system of doing so. But it does all that without weighing it down, without taking away the agility that makes these things work to begin with. A journalist, whether they be an independent or mainstream journalist, can use this to very easily take advantage of crowdsourced research. A journalist can set up a pursuance, put it under the indirect control of somebody else who they happen to trust, and allow them to coalesce a network of individuals who from time to time might be interested in helping a journalist get things right. And so, whereas now a journalist who wants to do crowdsourced research can use social media, like Twitter or Facebook, and say, hey, everybody, I'm trying to research this, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of downsides to that as well. And that's something that again, we also know more about what the downsides are, why it works and when it works best. and have kind of integrated that experience and knowledge into the planning of this system. So oh yes, we'll eradicate the mosquitoes within 6 months. All of them. Existing institutions, nonprofits, every organization that is out there doing something right now and which falls into our broad ideology of opposition to surveillance, opposition to the police state, opposition to the drug war, and other such things, how in such way as you as an individual define those things. Every group that exists that comes under that umbrella is welcome to use this. And they can do so either on a really experimental and limited basis, just by establishing a very simple pursuance presence. That's one option, and that option should be enough for most of these groups. Having a pursuance presence as an organization means that you now have access to large numbers of people who are, on average, going to be of higher caliber than just the random individuals you run across in any given internet community. These are people, obviously, who are early adapters. They're interested in working on things. They, of course, can set up profiles showing, what kind of skills they have. There's a system for evaluating others so that if you work in a pursuance somewhere and do good work on storyboarding for doing ad campaigns, that's something that can be marked down and kind of made available to others. You can sort of a digital resume. That is one of the things. It's one of the number of things that exist in some form in all kinds of other projects and social networking. We're bringing all of those existing things together and to add to the fundamentally different parts the pursuance system is more based on. So an organization that comes in has access to large numbers of people. It also has, and it can more easily make use of those people. I think in a vastly more efficient manner than an organization can right now. For one thing, it is much easier in these networks to allow good ideas to get an airing without bandwidth being filled up with bad ideas. It's easy to set up a large group in which individual participants may be members of other groups as well, but from time to time, can contribute to the other group. For instance, these crowdsourced journalism projects. Obviously, you'll have journalists who will, bring on 30 or 40 people in this network under them to, from time to time, respond to requests for help with researching things. The journalist will send out a message saying, "I'm looking into Saudi Aramco right now, and I need information on this, this, and this." Those people being a member of other pursuances as well that they may be more active in, don't just have to sit around waiting for that journalist. Obviously, they can be attached to multiple different entities for multiple different purposes, some of which may be kind of sporadic and kind of, one-off. So it's therefore not unrealistic for any good journalist who can kind of show that, look, I'm somebody who, unlike the majority of reporters right now, am interested in doing something that's going to lead to more accurate and more impactful reporting, should be able to get 30 or 40 people to, volunteer to work from time to time. And as you can see, if you've looked at the actual structures, the specifics of how this work, I'm not going to bring out my dry erase board because it's just soul crushing. But we have some materials on there that kind of show, again, what a basic pursuance looks like. And from that, you can kind of glean how a journalistic pursuance would work. The original and most central purpose of pursuance, though, again, is to bring large numbers of individuals who may not be affiliated with any groups into the ongoing activity of working for free societies in ways that are not easy to do right now. Again, right now there are online movements and organizations based on Facebook groups and much more informal sort of Twitter hashtag-based activities, movements that go on. And which have advantages by virtue of being so loose. We have, I think, struck a balance between keeping that agility and keeping those advantages, and also allowing for something that's more constant, more rigorous. People are connected to each other in ways in which they have agreed to the nature of those connections. And it goes a long way to solving the problem of, well, who's in charge of this and why? And, one of the major problems that comes up in these large ad hoc internet movements is the question of rights and responsibilities and agency and authority. And this system at a very basic level solves those by allowing every individual to start out with those same equal rights and then create a pursuance if they'd like, try to get others involved, structure it how they like, or delegate the power to structure it to others immediately. And thus, there's a number of different ways of working on the same goals to choose from, since there'll be pursuances structured in different ways for the same goal. So you'll have groups that are entirely democratic. You'll have someone who comes and creates a pursuance and immediately creates positions running off of the pursuance, whereby the people he chooses to bring on, or even setting it up so that anybody can come on, ultimately have the same amount of power as that founder does. You can have that here. And that's kind of comparable to a IRC channel, in which, everyone comes in and it's just sort of, some people will establish themselves as idea people, some will establish themselves as kind of worker bees. Some people are known to be good designers, coders, some people are known as good researchers. That kind of works itself out in an informal way in an IRC channel, just like it does in any, even when you have physically based movements all in one space. But this does allow a much more quick, efficient, and scalable way to allow people to arrange themselves in ways that work for them, that make sense, and to experiment with those arrangements. Again, because unlike an IRC channel, which is a very undifferentiated sort of very basic structure, a pursuance can be refined and customized in vastly different ways. And then when you start looking at how pursuances of different structures connect and share resources, you have a great deal of room for innovation. One of the most important features that sort of came out of early discussions when I got out of prison a year ago and started dealing with Steve, our programmer fellow, our lead developer, was the central library, central data library. That's the feature of this, whereby if you create a pursuance, or if you create a certain structure of pursuance, or a certain set of settings for a particular structure of pursuance that you find works well in some activity, you can make a copy of it and submit it to the central library and annotate it and sort of, jot down, here's what this worked for and here's the problems that arise. But at any rate, this is good for, some other things. So everyone goes to that library if they're establishing a pursuance, or if they want to improve their pursuance, or just want to make sure they're setting up a pursuance in ways that aren't reinventing the wheel necessarily. And they'll see those new structures and maybe use them, and they may tweak them further. They may find that a pursuance that works real well for gathering donations of bicycles and shipping them to Africa might also work real well for a similar task. They also might find that they're able to improve the efficiency by changing the structure, having 4 people connected to one fellow who's in charge of shipping, or directly connecting the PR person with everyone involved on the ground, so that he's more responsive. Again, there's so many ways that these can be arranged, just like with anything else in life. But unlike anything else in life, generally people don't have the opportunity to set up their own organizational chart. But these are essentially living organizational charts that any participant can create. And so the great number of people out there whose ideas, perhaps managerial talents or vision is going unused because of the poor job we've done as a society of bringing that into play. All of those things will sort of be unleashed here, especially as it grows. And even as it grows, even as it goes from, we'll have probably, I would say 1,500 of the 1,700 people who apply will probably bring in and accept, and then each of them, of course, will be able to bring on new participants. So even as it grows to several thousand within the first few months, and then tens of thousands, over years, that scalability will still be there. It will not be something that's over encumbered by having too many people. It's designed, quite the contrary. It's designed to get a little bit more refined as it grows. So as an individual participant, let's say, just like here, you want to help do something. You want to help fight back against injustice. You want to help work to secure the rights of others here or abroad. You come into the pursuance system, and you exist as a little, so let's say, circle or sphere in this great visualized plane. You see other circles and spheres all around. Many of them are connected to different ones of each other via lines. You see, it looks like a bunch of molecules, essentially. And each of those, of course, are other individuals who have joined onto the system and joined pursuances or started them. So you yourself, let's say you are interested in legal aid. You have a search function that you can use, obviously, to find a pursuance that is relevant to that. And of course, you could also create up your own pursuance if you don't find something satisfactory that you'd be interested in joining. Beyond that, you can also see the physical structures of these other pursuances you're interested in joining. So if there's a legal aid society that does help for immigrants in California, you can look at it visually and see how it's structured. You can see the little circles connected together in different ways, generally with labels saying, oh, this is our PR person, this is our guy, this is our on-the-ground guy who actually obtains data from individuals. This is another field work coordinator, and here's how they're connected. You can see exactly what they're doing. You can get a sense of maybe what they need. You can also get a sense, once you have your own pursuance, if you do, of how you might work with them in some way, ways that aren't easily determined if with regular organizations that have a website. This does make it easier, not just ultimately to establish these connections between groups to ensure that their resources are being shared in efficient ways, the information, strategies, not just to see that that's the case, but not just to connect them, but also to see where those potentials lie, where those opportunities lie. And again, you go outside of a building or you go look up its website on the internet, you're not going to be able to really get a sense of what they need more of necessarily. They may have a sense. They may be putting out employment ads or things saying we need this, blah, blah, but they may not. They may not recognize, the potential or opportunities. First of all, this structure makes it easier for them themselves to see those opportunities and deficits, and it makes it easier for you as a potential volunteer to do so. How does one find a pursuance to pursue or create one of one's own? Saying a moment ago, when you enter the system, there's a search function, keywords, just like anything else. But there's also a big visualized, the pursuance system is built around a visualized sort of universe, an ecosystem, in which you are in the same sort of online realm with all the other participants, all the pursuances. And so you see all these spheres, which are participants, connected with lines to each other within pursuances. And looking more closely, you can see what the pursuance does in most cases. Now, there's also there's an option to make that opaque, to make it so that people can't see much about your pursuance. That's obviously very helpful for certain kinds of activities in which you're subject to scrutiny, surveillance, disruption from private actors. But for the most part, we expect most pursuances to be pretty visible. Because a lot of this work is pretty mundane when you come down to it. But so you can search for a pursuance by subject or keyword or name of the people running it, if that's the case, or whatever else. You can also look around within the system and see, you see these networks, you see these entities, you see how they're connected, you see in many cases who the individuals are to the extent that they're operating openly, publicly. And so you're not just able to better find pursuances that you want to work with or see, or find what areas are not being done that you would like to pursue, or that are perhaps being done that you'd like to pursue in a different way. You also get to see very specifically where the potential is and where there are opportunities for collaboration between existing groups, or you can also see what pursuances are doing things in a unique way that you're excited about and that you want to be involved with. And then again, that's a major departure from how we're able to approach these things normally. And so that's a big part of it as well. That the visibility elements, the ability to see pursuances and to see the entirety of the ecosystem at once and see all these people at work assembled is also very important psychologically. There was in ancient Rome, at the height of the industrialization of slavery, or the height of slavery's usage in Rome, there was a proposal to make all the slaves wear the same tunic, same color of tunic. It was immediately shot down because it occurred to them that if the slaves all wore the same color of tunic, they would realize how many of them there were and how vastly their numbers eclipsed those of the slave owners. Likewise, it's very important when you're encouraging people to step up, to show them, look, here's how many other people are out there that agree with you on these basic issues. And you could probably, figure out where you agree and pursue those things and ignore your differences. That's what we're trying to do here. So the visualization whereby you can see this as it grows and grows, as it becomes more populated and more nuanced and more interconnections, you'll see these organisms, essentially, these civic organisms. And as they connect more and as they connect, in some cases, very specifically to share resources and work day to day, or more broadly, just to share information or strategies or agree on a common policy, you'll see these organizations connect more and more with each other. Pretty soon, you're going to see very large conglomerations of pursuances involving thousands of people divided into dozens of different pursuances of different sorts, but all connected in some way. A superorganism, essentially. And you may see, how that's going to develop is going to be one of the interesting things that I look forward to seeing, but there could be an array of superorganisms, pursuant superorganisms. Some perhaps that are all together in agreement on not just the basic issues that you have to agree with to be a pursuance participant, but more nuanced issues that they may strongly disagree with others. So you may have one superorganism that's generally geared towards socialism, and one that's more libertarian or anarchist, or another one that's some other variant of anarchism and socialism or whatever. And so as to the extent they want to work together because they agree on these other fundamentals, they can do that. But they can still, and are definitely encouraged to, and are really even should be motivated to do so because of how the system works, to build up these connections, so that the socialist super pursuance over here and the libertarian super organism over here will still probably work together on drugs, immigration, and 4 or 5 other major things that they agree on. And then to the extent that they don't agree on other issues, that's something that the socialist pursuants will also be working with these other super pursuances that do agree with them, but don't agree with them on the other things that they agree with libertarians with. So vast opportunities here to take more advantage of the issues that we all agree on, and to avoid the issues that oftentimes keep us apart on those other issues. And that's another big factor in this. Let me see if there was any more questions. And yes, as someone mentioned here in the comments, you can definitely morph the groups you already have, and that's a big part of this. We're definitely not saying, hey, drop everything and come use this system only, because your existing group, however it's based, if it's a brick and mortar building with a legal nonprofit set up in some state, or if it's just a Facebook group, or just even a very informal Twitter association based on keywords and hashtags, you can create a pursuance presence as well as a supplement to what you're doing, and use that to do the stuff better off this grid, back on your own turf. And you can also, if you'd like, over time, move more and more your operations on a pursuance. But the bottom line is that using pursuance does not require you to stop using anything else, or to make some big decision about restructuring everything. It's very much designed to get people interested, and you get even to make it convenient and practical for even large, very tightly structured organizations to get on here a little bit and to take advantage of what's available, and to offer their services, and to recruit people en masse, not just by way of getting more numbers, but also by way of being able to recruit people in ways where they can self-manage. And that's one of the big problems facing NGOs, is how do you make use of all the people that would definitely love to work with you and do what you want to do, but you don't have the managerial structures in place to accommodate them. And that's something that's much more easily done now, more easily addressed. And even as it is, and pursuance makes it vastly easier. So our strategy here is obviously to bring in everyone we can who are generally, fall under this broad ideological umbrella, and then let them sort out exactly, who they're willing to work with, and what level of experimentation they're willing to undergo. And of course, as groups successfully use this and others see that happens, that's going to attract others. Obviously, there's always some early adapters who are a little bit more experimental and adventurous than others. And we have lots of mainstream figures involved in this already on the board of directors, for one thing. And that's largely intended to signal to other mainstream figures that this is not a wild-eyed thing. This is very practical. And then as organizations, we already have some organizations that'll be working on it from the get-go when it launches, some NGOs and nonprofits. And then others, as people see them do it, other people who run NGOs will, be much more likely to try this out. So we have some more questions here. Okay, so there is this pursuance system that I know nothing of the structure of how it will work on the interwebs. I'm sure you have looked at blockchain technology. I really would be surprised if you incorporated blockchain, but have you considered some severe type of decentralization protected against suppression? There's a great deal of very specific technical information about that kind of addresses that. Blockchain is not incorporated in the pursuance system itself, but obviously there's any number of ways for people using it to incorporate blockchain into their pursuance and what they're doing. But the decentralization and the protection is addressed by several other things. And Steve Phillips has written about that. And I don't know if there's some links on our website. Our website's being redone right now, but you can find his deal. You can also follow him at ELIMI Steve on Twitter, Elimus Steve, where he fields those kind of questions quite a bit. But I can tell you that, for one thing, the servers that we use to oversee this main instance of pursuance, as a parenthesis, this is open source software, so you can take pursuance and run it on your own server, and and your universe is not connected to anybody else's. So you can bring on the 7 people that you want to bring on, and you guys are connected to nothing else and totally secure, as secure as you can make it. And that's probably some people will do that. For most things, it will be better to use that main instance, because a lot of the point of this is being able to collaborate very easily with these large numbers of other people. But the servers that we run will be based in Iceland. And that's something we spent a year looking at, in the process of setting this all up. That's a question we've had before us. And that ultimately is what we decided upon, partly because Brigitta Johnsditter, the Icelandic member of parliament and longtime transparency activist, is a member of parliament in Iceland, and she's also on our board of directors. And so we've spoken to her and some other people who have agreed to help us make that happen. So that's one part of it. The end-to-end encryption, which is incorporated into it, is another part of that solution. And there's a number of other aspects as well that I probably shouldn't get into because I don't want to get them wrong. I'm not technical myself. But again, I should note, for those who joined me after I mentioned it, our website has been revamped, and it's much simpler now, so you can get a quick sense, a better and quicker sense of what it is without having to go through a very wordy presentation I wrote a while back. So that should help. That should help with the basic elements of this. Oh, okay, yeah. There's someone just posted the subreddit. Or no, they didn't post it to the website. We have a subreddit now. It's Pursuance Project, or it's /r/Pursuance Project or Pursuance System. Let me see, make sure I do the wrong deal. And that's obviously we'll be posting a lot of these other materials that aren't easy to find yet, all in one place. It's also a great place to ask questions, and if you have ideas for pursuances that you don't necessarily want to work on yourself, but you think other people might be interested. If you have ideas for, tactics, strategies, like if you had $1 million to start an organization, or if you had 20 people, under you, what would you do? If you have a good idea regarding that, that's something you can post on the subreddit, and others may pick it up. Which brings us to another element of this. You can go on Pursuance and create a structure for Pursuance. Say, like, you set it up, say, this is for this task, and I want it to be run kind of like this. I want it to be sort of democratic. I want 3 people overseeing and voting on the major decisions, and then they can bring people onto them, and then set that up and leave it there. And you can lock it and put someone in charge of it that you meet or know and feel comfortable with having do this, or you can just leave it and let whoever comes who might like that idea take it over and use it. And of course, you can make multiple copies of it. So a number of groups can use this same idea, and they can each grow it in their own ways. That's another element of this that a lot of us find very exciting, because, of course, to the extent that we're able to bridge the gap between people who have ideas but aren't necessarily in a position to work on them because they don't have enough time or whatever, or they're just not interested, to the extent that we can get them to understand that there's a place they can put their ideas where it might get taken up very quickly and taken somewhere really extraordinary, that's going to encourage that. And so, it takes obviously a number of different kinds of people to do this kind of activism or do this kind of civic work, and this makes it easier for them to find each other. It also makes it easier for them, even if they don't want to find each other, to make their expertise available. There'll be pursuances manned by veteran activists and veterans of all kinds of different work and activity in this sphere, whereby their pursuance will be entirely based on helping train younger people or people who want to have new skills to do activism. Obviously, there's one organization that we have involved with us that's doing some videos, actually help us with our Kickstarter, called Frontline Wellness. And that's a relatively traditional NGO, does a lot of global stuff. Sorry, I was reading something. They provide medical expertise, medical training, and conflict resolution training, and also do it themselves in conflict zones around the world. So they obviously have access to a great deal of expertise, and we know there's plenty of people who would like to travel and go do this kind of work, and this is a great way for them to go on and get that training. And it's a great way for people who have been activists, for 30, 40 years and were involved in the anti-war movements to pass on some of their knowledge, to get together and create guides that can be adapted by others. To put people in touch with others who can make use of their abilities. Just all kinds of things that involve human collaboration can be done with this. And in many cases, I think it can be done with this better than it can with any other existing format. And as time goes on, we're pretty happy with what we have in terms of how it works, but as time goes on, we'll be growing, we'll be adding customability, we'll be adding new features. There'll be several, from the get-go, there'll be several applications and services that will be incorporated into it, like Transparency Toolkit, which is a sort of information data collation tool that a fellow called Shadash out of Germany has got a lot of funding for the years, and he's advised us on some of these aspects. Anyway, and that brings me to one more element of this, which is the harm reduction element, as I like to call it. There are obviously a great number of encryption tools, research tools. There's all kinds of things out there that individual developers are doing, on open source basis, and that get used by people who really know a lot about these things, but which don't get used as much as they should. And obviously, bringing a lot of people with these interests into a single place makes it easier for those tools to get their fair hearing, to get adapted and used more broadly. It's just like when you have in large cities where you have harm reduction centers where heroin addicts come to exchange needles. While they're there, they often give them pamphlets, make services available to them, educational programs, point them in the direction of other things they might need. This is kind of like that, providing better encryption software and techniques and knowledge to organizations that are not real technology forward. That's one function of this as well. But a larger deal, there's lots of data techniques and research programs and software and that kind of thing that are open source that can be much more widely used. When you have people coming into this large shared space online and those things being made available to them. All right, let's see. If you don't mind, could you elaborate on how the evaluation and rating process of users works, post-completion or ending of the pursuance itself? So that's actually something we've had several different ideas on, some overlapping. Basically, what we've decided, and this is a little bit premature, but there will be a mechanism whereby you can work, when you work a pursuance, others can, if the system shows that you've worked with somebody within that pursuance, that person can provide an evaluation of you that can be made available. Now, there's a lot of questions about how far should we go with that, and that's one of those things that probably, however we started out, will probably change as we see what problems crop up and what else is needed. But there's a number of ways of approaching this, and we're not 100% sure on what the best way is. It's going to be that's going to work for the most people and do the most good without becoming a problem itself. But the bottom line is that there will be a mechanism whereby you, as someone who runs a pursuance, or you as someone who's a member of pursuance and is able to bring on people to work with you directly under you, will be able to get a sense of who that person is when they're applying. And that's going to differ from pursuance to pursuance. For some pursuances, are going to not use real names at all because they're doing research on intelligence contractors, or they're Pakistanis who are developing a political literature group, and they're, for one reason or another, they're under heavy scrutiny, and want to remain safe under that scrutiny. And they're going to use pseudonyms and all that. They may make their pursuance entirely opaque. You won't be able to look at it and see anything about it. So in those cases, they're just generally going to use the anonymity approach rather than the transparency approach. The transparency approach, of course, is people coming under real names. We can see where they're coming from, who they are, blah, blah. So, and there's combinations of that. So, but the average pursuance, again, the average pretty sort of mundane mainstream pursuance that's doing things like that's doing philanthropic work or crowdsourced research into innocuous subjects, or just organizing donation drives, they'll be pretty visible, and they may, some will require people to prove who they are, and operate openly, and others will do the exact opposite. So there's different approaches that can be taken that we're trying to incorporate within the system so that it's customizable enough for everybody's different needs. On an informal basis, of course, and this is something that how it worked with Anonymous or Telecomics or Project PM or other things. There's people applying for a pursuance that is totally anonymous, where everybody's using monikers rather than their real names, can just refer them to somebody else. They look, oh, here's somebody I worked with. You can contact. You may, and otherwise establish themselves as trustworthy according to some person. And that's never 100%. There's no surefire way of making sure that A, the person isn't crazy or otherwise potentially disruptive, or B, a instigator or law enforcement agent or a company private security deal that go out and disrupt these groups and sabotage them on a regular basis, more and more these days. There's no 100% way to defend yourself from that, but the pursuance system does. It is better than what we used to do when we were doing very, sensitive work that could be easily disrupted. Just having IRC channels where everyone can come in, and you don't know, and there's 100 people sitting in a chat room, and you just know that 3 or 4 of them are cops, and 5 more are representatives of intelligence contractors that are being paid to surveil you, blah blah. That obviously wasn't a great way of dealing with that, but we didn't really have a good alternative. With a pursuance, of course, you can build a pursuance, build a structure, and on the margins, bring people, as people come in on the margins, they may not be able to access, see, or do the tasks that people assign. They may not be able to see much inside. That's kind of a traditional. There's always been a cell structure in revolutionary groups, or just back in the 19th century, groups that met to talk about religion or whatever, free of censorship and persecution. That's always been kind of the way that's done. And this can be done in a more customized, more sort of systematic basis with this system. Will those who operate openly be able to work with those that are anonymous within that system? It's a good question, and the answer is yes, with some qualifiers. So obviously, you can have a pursuance in which everyone involved is working openly, and that pursuance itself may have a connection. They may build a connection with a pursuance, exact opposite, where everybody is anonymous, where they're sharing information, and they're working together. Or you have a single pursuance in which the several people start it and they're well-known figures and they make themselves known, and then but they allow anybody else who joins it to either work anonymously or make themselves known. So there's any combination people can do, but it's very customizable. So basically, if there's a way to arrange it in real life, there's probably a way to arrange it with pursuance. And there's many ways in which not possible to arrange in real life that you can do in pursuance in these things. So the answer is generally yes to can you questions. Not always. I mean, they're good to ask, but in most of these cases, the answer is going to be that's going to depend on how the pursuance is set up and how it grows and what decisions are made on the ground by the participants. Which let me circle back to explaining that a person creates a pursuance. At that moment, that person has full control over it. So that being the case, they can either remain as sort of the chief of it, the unquestioned leader who may delegate power and may bring people under them, but still maintain control over everything in the end. But in most cases, it's going to be someone creates a pursuance and delegates power, brings on somebody else they know to have equal control over it. In other cases, there's going to be vastly democratic, whereby all members of a pursuance, of 100 people, can vote on certain issues. But the main elements, the main sort of mechanism for democracy and for collective control over things is less about voting in most pursuances and more about free association. So it's more about, I connect, I watered it yesterday. I give it water every once a week. So it's more about choosing who to align with, who to connect with, and what to do with those connections than it is about large numbers of people getting together and voting. But again, the voting can be incorporated into any aspect of this. So you'll have pursuances in which there are portions that are democratically controlled. So maybe someone starts a pursuance and there's a couple of people with them, sort of an oligarchy or a board of directors or something of that sort, and then connects down another part of it that's doing other kinds of work, and they're permitted to set up an entirely democratic structure where they're operating as a majority rule entity within that same pursuance. And of course, pursuances themselves, again, just to go back to what we said earlier, regardless of if this pursuance is entirely democratic and this is half democratic and this one is set up in some totally novel way that we don't even have a word for yet, they can all connect to each other still, either through individual participants or through the pursuance itself on a formal thing, and still be sharing resources, sharing strategies, making agreements, alliances, information, so that, even as differentiation occurs, even as people pursue different kinds of work. Yes, thank you very much. My speech has been getting more enunciated. Even as a differentiation occurs, you still have the degree of unity or potential unity and customizable, choice-based unity that allows for a large organism of people, a large collection of people to exist while maintaining their independence. Every step of a pursuance, every growth of a pursuance represents two or more people making an agreement and going into that agreement very clear on what that is. And that's very different from, a mob or a rally or a amorphous, movement of any sort, where you have those difficulties that do arise, as a matter of course. Oh, the box of the P. This is, you're saying it backwards, I suppose, because of the camera, but this is the pursuance symbol, which Breeza, this woman in California, painted for me. She likes to send me things. And, I guess it's not backwards, it's a P. Yeah, it's okay, it's not. I don't know how cameras work. Anyway. That's our symbol there. You can send a website. And actually, it's a visual aid, since we have nothing else, because this kind of shows very basically what pursuance is. Here's the pursuance. In this case, this person, used to be just a circle. he created a pursuance and it was like this. And then he brought on two other people to be directly connected to that pursuance. And so they also have agency and control over the pursuance itself, decision making, how it grows. Now, this very basic structure of three people connected to one pursuance, this can still differ in many ways. It may be that all three of these people have to agree on any decision. It may be that they all three have to agree on major decisions. It could be that it's a majority, 2-to-1 majority vote to the decisions. That's all in the setting. It's all customizable. So obviously, when you start talking about other more larger pursuances, more complicated pursuances, you can start to imagine how much customability there is, so that people can get the associations they work in just right, and allow for self-organization down the line. Bring on hundreds of people and let them self-organize. Let them decide how many bring in under them each. Let them decide how they're going to work together. There's a number of ways of doing this, and the defaults, the way that a pursuance, the nature of a pursuance, when you first create it, if you don't make any major changes to it, does emphasize that sort of self-organization. It emphasizes the idea that you have this idea and there's a couple people you want to work with. That's great. And if there's something that requires a lot of work, let one of those people bring on someone under them, and let them bring on as many as they want under them, and so forth, so that these large networks occur, build up, and that ideas can flow, can filter up to the top. Having described that, I can go into a bit about the filter system that is makes its appearance in this system quite a bit. The filter here is you have a large network originating at the pursuance level, the actual pursuance itself, and the people who created it, and extending out, different directions for some ways. If it's a research pursuance, it's generally going to work whereby everyone, is pushing ideas to where they need to get. It could be a journalist in the middle or whatever. It could be several journalists in different points, but everyone who brings on, if you bring on 10 people, you're going to get those messages from 10 people. So if you're in a research pursuance, 10 people under you, you're going to get those messages, and that gives you an impetus to get good people under you and not just bring on just everyone, because you obviously want to only deal with good information. And so the journalist or whatever, or the person who's running an organization and hoping to get ideas every once in a while, is not having to deal with the thousands of people he might have to deal with if he goes on Twitter and asks for information and gets a good response. He's able, that filtration is going on automatically. And the feed you get from the people that you've brought on is only as good as the people you brought on. And so you do have an impetus to make sure you're bringing on people who are right for that kind of activity. Yeah, pursuance is an operation essentially, but it could be, just like with operations, it could be like a very specific thing, like we're trying to stop this legislation, or it could be we're trying to stop this kind of legislation in general, or we're trying to is there a way I can set the comments so they don't make sound? I don't know. I don't really know much. Whoops, what did I just do? Do that. Anyway, I hope you guys can contend with the comment sounds. I can't hear them myself. Let's see if we have more questions here. How can we stop genocide? Well, that's actually an interesting question that is now broadly being discussed by social networks in general, because obviously Facebook in some ways has made it easier for people who are conducting genocide to do their job by spreading information, just like it makes it easier for anything else. Just like, just same thing with books, radio, these have all been used for the exact opposite things over the years. If you're responding to genocide, obviously there's models for that exist. There are models that are pretty similar to aid programs and all that. So a hypothetical pursuance for that might be started by an organization that has this kind of experience, and they may recruit tons of people to provide information to those to villages or populations that are at risk. May allow them to connect and provide for transportation. There's a number of things that, just like if you're in real life, if you're trying to stop something from happening, think about the logistics of that. A lot of that can be made easier. A lot of those sort of basic responses can be made easier, and it can be more easy to recruit for and to organize with the pursuance. But I don't really know a great deal about how NGOs deal with that in general. But again, the great thing about the pursuance system is that there will be people who do know, and they will have established either they have organizations, existing NGOs that have built a pursuance presence, perhaps to provide guides on how I can help this, and this, perhaps to work temporarily with other pursuances that may have resources on the ground or some other expertise that might be helpful. It allows these people who are out there doing different things for the same reason to coordinate better if they want to. It makes it vastly easier and quicker to do so. So, and that's important, obviously, in any kind of crisis situation. For instance, frontline wellness, for instance, if there's a genocide going on in Southeast Asia, like there is now, they could use pursuance to get in contact with people who want to volunteer. In fact, they've written a great guide on similar things that they'll be able to distribute using this. The bottom line is that it will be easier to find who's doing what and what ideas already exist, find people who are interested, and get them all together in a working entity, pursuance, more quickly and more stably and securely than anything else. And that's obviously important. Anytime you're dealing with opposing factions, where you have one group committing the genocide or whatever, and the other group defending against it, security is a big deal. If you're out there providing information to the good guys or to the victims, that information, for the most part, should not fall into the hand of the enemy. So end-to-end encryption, as incorporated into the system, is a great step forward on that. The ability to bring in both anonymous and named individuals in ways that protect both their chosen modus operandi and allows them to maintain that but still work together. It's also important. It's it makes sure we're not fragmenting into groups that are doing the same thing, rather than doing them easier by working together. Okay, so here's another question. Next question is, Julian Assange's philosophy is to counter corrupt governments by permitting whistleblower leaks. Will pursuance help anonymize information to journalists and the Intercept's current getting leakers caught problem? Most likely, yes. Obviously, end-to-end encryption is a component of that, but there's a number of ways you can use pursuance to facilitate that. I wouldn't necessarily say that pursuance would be a great help on that. Obviously, the technology exists already to make that reasonably safe, but pursuance would allow for more options. If you're a whistleblower or thinking about being a whistleblower, it would allow you to look at different groups, encryptedly, while you're using end-to-end encryption, and see, what is their track record? Have they done this? Who's running the group if that information is visible? And so rather than have to send whatever you have to a certain group that happens to be most well known, you have more options on how you want to handle that. And again, it also allows people who are interested in that problem to give it a try, to create a group and experiment with it, and hopefully experimenting with less risky whistleblowing, but to establish themselves and grow just like WikiLeaks did, or these other groups that have come out. And so, with this, let's say you're a person who does have a great idea on how this can be done more securely and more effectively. With this, you come to the pursuance system, you have a million ways of going about that. And it's customizable enough that your particular vision is going to be doable very easily. And that you're going to find any people who can help you put it into practice, and get with organizations that can teach you things that are kind of known or believed about this practice, and ensure that you're doing it the best way possible. So that's, again, another element of this that applies to a lot of the activity on here. Sort of the dissemination of information, the ability to evaluate information, the ability to see what is already being done and how they're doing it, and figure out if you can do it better, or if you'd rather just work with them. That's a big advantage when you're undertaking, when you're trying to get involved and trying to make sure that you're helping and not hurting, and that you're not wasting anybody's time or your own time, or that kind of thing. This makes all that easier to ensure. But again, nothing is 100%. So that's the other thing that everybody should keep in mind at all points. Regarding that, I'm not going to go into specifics on those things right now while speaking live, just because I want to, it wouldn't necessarily be helpful. So I want to avoid questions about individuals who I've known and relationships and all that right now. So because it doesn't necessarily give you any information that you really need. I don't mind you asking. I'm just saying, but I have to. I also want to focus on the, things we're doing rather than that kind of thing. Again, we have the subreddit Pursuance Project, we mentioned earlier, that to the extent you have questions, and better yet, to the extent that you have ideas about individual pursuances or features that should be added, if you know about some kind of software that's useful for research or organizing people or notifying people of things, anything that you would like to see added, you can go talk about it there. That's probably the best way to do it, because we'll see it and others can see it, and you can sort of get that kind of work going on right now, the work of thinking up and designing new ways of approaching these things. And we also have plenty of articles about the specifics, and we've explained pursuance in other different ways, using metaphors and kind of references to existing things that might help certain people to understand it better, obviously. There's a metaphor that I've used a number of times, the scaffolding metaphor, that kind of addresses what we're trying to do here. If you have a building, an older building that is deteriorating, and not everyone agrees on everything about the building and what ought to be done with the building, or that thing, but some large numbers of the people will agree that certain things need to be done to the building. They'll probably agree that these bricks should be taken out, these should be replaced, this part should be taken down altogether. They should start by building scaffolding around the building. That way they can get about the business of doing the things they agree on that may be fundamental. And then those who agree on other parts that others don't agree on can work together on those parts. And the other important thing about scaffolding is you can put nets on them to catch bricks when they fall. So as governments deteriorate, or as civil society deteriorates, anything else, it is important to have in place reliable systems whereby coordination can be done to protect the people who generally are victimized in those situations. And that's another way that pursuance should be thought of. It has aspects of a union, it has aspects of a political party, a fraternal organization from the olden days. It combines a lot of these aspects and should be considered as that. It should be considered as not just an activism and research platform, but as something that you can be involved in, whereby you are finally speaking independently for yourself. You're able to join or leave a group, as an individual. You are able to do so exactly in the way that you choose. You are now in a legacy institution, I like that. You're now in a space with people that, by virtue of being there, they all agree on these basic principles. And that means you're now part of a different polity. And over time, that polity, you might think of it as superior to your legacy polity, as in you might find the tens of thousands of people using pursuance and working on pursuance to be a better group of people to assume an identity with than the nation you were born into or your local government. Because unlike the nation you were born into or your local government, pursuance probably isn't out there arresting people on potential crime laws or engaging in widespread corruption. So it's something that you can actually be proud of, which is a novelty to a lot of us, people in the U.S. Who have any interest in human rights and that sort of thing. It should be seen as a way to do a lot of important work that needs to be done, whether it be reform or whatever, while also building networks that can later be used to confront these institutions on a more ambitious scale. And just again, as against unions did. Unions, whether in Poland a few years ago or in the U.S. 100 years ago, by virtue of what they were and how they thought of themselves, they were able to accomplish a great deal, either on a limited or long-term basis. And so this is obviously not organized on a labor basis. It's not a labor union, obviously, but it is a conglomeration of people who have come together. So it should be considered as something that ultimately, we want to see governments challenge on human rights and on things that they're doing in other spheres by these pursuances and by the super pursuances, by the superorganisms that arise. And that's something that's very much within our reach as these things refine themselves over time. And, at the same time, this is still, a very mainstream thing that we want to bring in lots of people who are not necessarily out to overthrow the world, but, do want to help oppose, criminal justice misconduct, who want to oppose law enforcement misconduct, who want to organize to expose and to inform about surveillance and propaganda apparatus by various governments, people who want to improve journalism by helping to experiment with it. It's a number of things, but ultimately on a larger scale, it can become something in which the average participant believes himself to be part of something that is more important and more virtuous than the government that he might have otherwise just pledged his allegiance to, just by default. And that's important because how you think of an organization or institution has a lot to do with what it actually becomes and how it actually operates. A bakery is in the business of making and selling bread, but if everyone working at the bakery suddenly thinks of themselves as a civil rights organization, that bakery can become a civil rights organization. That's happened, both dramatic and mundane ways throughout history, where some institution has turned into something else entirely. And it will probably happen to various degrees with this. How would this permit illegal activity such as drug gangs, and how would law enforcement come to understand it, be it peaceful protest or communication between drug pushers? This isn't a nice question, but I know it's necessary. It's very much, with that question, it's very similar to anything else like Bitcoin, Facebook, Twitter, email, the internet itself, in that, obviously it can be used for all kinds of things we haven't intended it for. But the answer to that, I think ours is less likely to be turned to those purposes, simply because Facebook you can join no matter who you are. Twitter, same thing. It's content neutral. Internet's content neutral. Encryption is content neutral. Whereas pursuance is not open to everybody who wants to join. Pursuance, you have to be accepted in either by one of the participants or by the core team that will be on an ongoing basis accepting applications. So it'll be pretty difficult for a population that begins largely with activists and blah, blah, to bring in drug cartels. And frankly, I think that over time, it's going to be less affected by the problems of capture. We use that in the sense of the term state capture than these other social media are. Again, because it's a certain kind of population that's having to be brought in by this certain kind of these demographics that we built by choosing these certain people and then allowing them to bring in others. Obviously, the demographics will change over time, and we lose those of us in the core team who are bringing on these first participants. At first we have control over like the 1,500 people that we accept out of those who have applied. But then immediately afterwards, as those 1,500 decide who to bring in their own right, the nature of it changes. And so the control of it, the demographics are determined by the participants themselves. And so over time, you're going to have, you'll have more, a lot of U.S. citizens to begin with, and Europeans, and that'll change over time. You'll have more, you have more Russians, more Chinese, more subcontinental Indians and Pakistanis coming in, and they'll be addressing their particular concerns more and more, working on their other national and regional problems. And along with that, you'll also have probably a different kind of person over time. First you have early adapters. That's always the case. Over time, you have people who are not necessarily early adapters, but might be useful in other regards. There are people who are pretty conservative in their practices, who don't really like, technology, perhaps, or whatever, but who are very useful. And over time, we'll start getting more of them as they hear more about it and see what can be done with it. So you'll have all kinds of different changes in what the average participant user is. As for law enforcement, simply by virtue of the fact that we're creating something that can be used by activists, you invite law enforcement surveillance and disruption. Obviously, that was the case with Project PM, my crowdsourced research group that was very, very thoroughly gone after by the FBI and other organizations, simply because we were making available information that had already been brought out and presenting it in ways that damage the DOJ itself and damage their corporate partners. So you're always going to have that degree of scrutiny and opposition. Unlike with Project PM or Anonymous or Telecomics, we have more ways to protect against that kind of thing. Again, it's not 100%. As this becomes more adapted, you're going to have more organizations on the other side thinking up better ways to try to infiltrate groups and all that. But again, because of some of the structures and sort of the filter aspect of this we talked about earlier, it's going to be much more difficult for them to do that. Obviously, with a good example of all this is Anonymous. You got a fellow, Aaron Barr, who was a former military figure who ran a company called H.B. Gary Federal, which is an intelligence contracting firm, and worked with governments and provided software help and blah, blah. He infiltrated Anonymous very easily because he just went into the IRC, which is not a secret, and just sat there and recorded information. That will be very difficult to do with pursuance system, because first you have to apply to join a pursuance and be accepted. And in many pursuances of the sort of the law enforcement communities and private contractors who help to disrupt journalism and disrupt civic participation, the ones that they're most interested in are generally going to be most secure. They're going to make most use of anonymity, or they're going to make most use of the practice of requiring you to do work to gain access to more information about what else is being done. That's very similar to how intelligence agencies operate. Obviously, the secretary in the NSA building doesn't know about Project Scalpel, but and someone who's doing a high-end project in one end of the building may not know about something else on the other side. That's very much the case. Compartmentalization. That same compartmentalization, to varying degrees, can be used effectively and has been, and will be by pursuances to minimize the danger, minimize the threats from those actors. Is there room for anti-Chinese activism, China activision after the cyber war intellectual property losses? I don't know. That's up to individual pursuances to decide. Regarding this conversation that's going on about leaders and all that, one of the approaches is having a known leader that people can look to and know their background and say, this is somebody, I trust, and I'm going to work with them. And pursuance, there's will be some pursuances of those lines. You'll have people who are leaders who are veteran activists and all that, and you've read about them, whatever, and they'll start pursuances, and people will join because of that. But there'll also be but that's just one aspect of it. In many cases, you absolutely can have very effective action without leaders. Or without much leadership, and the pursuance system will allow people to experiment with those more collective structures more easily and kind of find the right balance for them. But it's oftentimes throughout history, it does help to have a central figure that can enunciate these things or whatever. But it also has drawbacks. And the most important thing about this is that no one has to sign on to any philosophy about how leadership should exist, whether it should exist, how much democracy is required in a organization doing important, time-sensitive work. Those are decisions that will be made piecemeal, gradually, procedurally, by the individuals involved. And in some cases, I think pursuances will show that a certain mode of operation works real well, and other pursuances doing maybe very different things will adopt that same successful model, just like happens, any other facet of life. So this will provide a chance for those who would like to see and envision more procedural collective control over operations of this sort to try those out in different ways and find what works best and get others to adopt them. And that's where we come back, obviously, to that central data library we talked about earlier, whereby you can submit your, a pursuance you've built or a structure you built to this library that everyone can see, and write down, how it worked and why it worked, and others can take a copy of that and adapt it to their needs, evolve it some more, tweak it some more, make it better, resubmit it. That's one of the several stages. That's one of the several mechanisms of evolution that exists in this system. One of the things that helps to ensure that it will grow better as it grows more populous, and that it will grow more refined over time. As everyone coming in creating a pursuance is able to be aware of the latest thinking in organization, in tactics and all that kind of thing. Templates, another aspect I haven't mentioned yet. There are things that are pretty universal, like writing to Congress or getting in touch with journalists that are repeatable, that you do quite a bit, that can be designed and submitted to the library and adapted. So if you're interested, if you have a pursuance that's working on prison reform, you may have a couple of aspects you may be doing. All this media work on one end and research on the other end, but you may also just be trying to deal with legislative bodies, and you can adapt this template that makes it, where it's all kind of set as to how it works. You're going to write this letter and blah, blah, you're going to do this, and this. And that can be applied to a number of different practices. There'll be templates for starting marches. There'll be guides, along those same lines. They'll be disseminated. So, and then beyond everything all the examples I can think of and all the ideas that we have here, as people get using this, you're going to have all kinds of brilliant ideas that we never thought of in terms of how you draw media attention to something, and how you get that media attention to translate into effective activism, and how you translate, knowledge into legislation, and how you deal with all these things. When we have everyone able to really to most efficiently and most fairly get their ideas out there and try their hand at different things, people are going to self-organize in a way that ensures that we're making use of everything. We're taking advantage of everyone's talents in the most efficient way possible. That's the self-organization aspect that's very very powerful and very important in this project. I'm gonna go ahead and go. I think that's time. We covered some good ground here. Thank everybody for your questions. Please share this and share our website with anyone who may be interested in this kind of thing. Researchers, students, professors, scientists, journalists, just readers of news who, right now, all they can really do is try to share things on Twitter, but who want to try to be more effective and kind of, figure out new procedures by which to really fight back against the things that are happening. Please spread that information to them. Let them decide if they think this might be worth doing. That's one of the main things we need to do right now, is make sure that we have the greatest and widest possible basis, demographic base for this, because how this grows is going to depend a great deal on, who's in there early on bringing other people, and who's quickly, building up pursuances over the long term. So we want quality people, and we want a lot of them. So please spread the word, share this, share our website, and share that subreddit, which I posted earlier. And thank you very much. Adios.